I still remember the exact tone of his voice that night. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Cold, flat, like I was a burden he'd finally grown tired of carrying. "Mom, you're useless now." Those words echoed through the kitchen like a verdict. The house I'd built with my own hands suddenly felt like someone else's property, and I, a stranger, trespassing in my own home. For a few seconds I just stared at him, my son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died. His face was sharp with the arrogance of youth, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of something I had never seen in him before: contempt. The dishes I'd been washing slipped from my hand and shattered in the sink, but he didn't flinch. He just sighed, annoyed, as if I'd interrupted his peace. It was almost midnight. The glow of his phone screen lit up his expression. Careless, detached, that permanent smirk of someone who believes they're owed the world. "You don't understand, Mom," he said, crossing his arms. "You're retired. You can't even keep up with anything anymore. The house is too big for you. It's time to let go." Let go. Those two words hit me harder than useless. Because let go meant giving up everything that held meaning. My memories, my pride, my independence. He wasn't asking. He was informing me. My own son had decided I was no longer needed in the world I'd created. I turned off the tap, slowly wiped my hands, and leaned against the counter. "So what exactly are you saying, Daniel?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "That I should move out of my own house?" He shrugged, eyes still fixed on his phone. "It's not just your house, Mom. It's the family home. Dad would have wanted it to go to me eventually anyway. Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's stupid for you to live here alone. You could sell it, get a small apartment, maybe near one of your old friends. I'll handle everything." I wanted to scream that I was the one who had handled everything for 28 years. That I had taken extra shifts, skipped dinners, worked through pneumonia just to keep this roof over his head. But the words froze in my throat. I looked at him and saw not my baby boy who used to cry for my hugs, but a man with greed in his eyes and entitlement in his heart. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I built this home with your father. Every inch of it. Every dollar. Don't talk to me about what's stupid." He rolled his eyes and walked toward the stairs. "You always make things dramatic. I'm just being practical. Anyway, I've already talked to a realtor friend. He said the market's great right now. We could get a fortune for this place." That was when I realized he'd already decided. There was no conversation to be had. My opinion didn't matter. I was just an old woman standing in the way of his plans. He disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the silence that followed. I stood there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock above the stove, and the quiet drip from the faucet. The same kitchen where I had once made pancakes for his birthdays now felt like a courtroom after the sentence had been delivered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room surrounded by the photos that told the story of our lives. Daniel's first day of school, his graduation, the day he got his first car. Each photo a reminder that love can sometimes rot into disappointment. Around 3 a.m., I heard his heavy footsteps as he went to bed, still talking on the phone with that realtor friend. I whispered to myself, "You'll regret this one day, Daniel." By morning, I had made up my mind, not in anger, but in clarity. If he wanted to treat me like a liability, I'd show him just how useless I could be. I brewed my coffee the same way I always did. 2 sugars, no cream, and sat by the window watching the first light touch the garden. The roses were blooming. My husband had planted them the year Daniel was born. I smiled faintly. He used to say those roses would outlive us both. After breakfast, I went upstairs and looked at Daniel's old room. The walls were still covered with posters from his teenage years. Bands he no longer listened to, dreams he no longer followed. The bed was unmade, the smell of stale beer lingering in the air. He'd moved back in 6 months ago after losing his job, promising it would be temporary. But temporary had turned into entitlement. I sat on his desk chair, opened the drawer, and found an envelope. Bank statements, credit card bills, overdue notices. My stomach sank. He was in more trouble than I thought. Maybe that was why he wanted the house sold. He needed money, not practicality. I felt the sting of betrayal again, sharper this time. Not just because he'd lied, but because he'd used the word family home as a weapon against me. He wasn't protecting our legacy. He was trying to cash it out. I closed the drawer, stood up, and took a deep breath. "Fine," I whispered. You want the house sold? It'll be sold. By noon, I was at the bank. Mrs. Patterson, the branch manager, greeted me warmly. She'd known me since Daniel was a child. Mrs. Miller, what brings you in today? I need to review my accounts, I said calmly. And I'd like to make sure my son doesn't have access to any of them. Also, I'd like to transfer some funds quietly. She gave me a curious look but didn't ask questions. After an hour of paperwork, I left the bank feeling lighter. Not vindictive, just free. I spent the rest of the day walking through the neighborhood, noticing details I'd ignored for years. The cracked pavement near the mailbox, the children playing by the fence, the old oak tree that had grown tall enough to shade half the driveway. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. That evening when Daniel came home, he barely acknowledged me. He reheated leftovers and went straight to his room. I waited until I heard the door close and the familiar rhythm of his snoring. Then I took out my phone, scrolled to the realtor's number he'd mentioned, his friend, and dialed. "Hi, this is Mrs. Miller," I said softly. "I understand my son spoke to you about selling the house. I'd like to move forward, but on my terms. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" "Of course, ma'am," he replied, sounding pleasantly surprised. "I can come by at 10. "Perfect," I said. "Let's make sure everything's done properly." When I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. Daniel thought he was the one in control. But by the time he woke up, the future of this house would belong to me again, in the only way that truly mattered. The morning after our fight, the house felt emptier than usual. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and the ticking clock seemed to count down to something I couldn't yet name. I poured myself coffee, but it tasted bitter, not because of the roast, but because I was drinking it alone again. David didn't come home that night. I pretended not to worry, but every sound outside made my heart leap. By noon the next day, he finally appeared. Eyes, bloodshot clothes, wrinkled, smelling faintly of alcohol and smoke. He didn't look at me. He walked straight past the living room and into his old bedroom, the one that still had his childhood posters on the wall. "David," I said softly, standing by the doorway. "Where were you?" He let out a dry laugh. "Don't start, Mom. I'm tired." I wanted to hug him to remind him that no matter how old he was still my boy. But the way he looked at me, cold, detached, froze me where I stood. "You used to care about me," I whispered. He turned sharply. "I still do," he said, but his tone carried none of it. "But you need to stop controlling everything. You had your life. Let me live mine." It stung because I'd spent my whole life trying not to control him, just to keep him safe. But that's the cruel irony of motherhood. The more you love, the more you're accused of smothering. That night, I sat by the window staring out at the neighborhood lights, remembering the laughter that used to fill this house. Birthdays, late-night talks, the smell of fresh cookies cooling on the counter. Now all that warmth was replaced by resentment, his and mine. The next few weeks blurred together. David started bringing his girlfriend Emily around more often. She was polite at first, even charming, but I could sense her subtle influence. She'd talk about modern lifestyles, about how people our age should let go of old attachments. One evening, as I was washing dishes, I overheard them whispering in the living room. "She's holding you back," Emily said. "You could rent this place out, make real money, or sell it, move to the city." My chest tightened. This house wasn't just walls and bricks. It was my late husband's hands, my sacrifices, every bedtime story ever told under its roof. I dried my hands and stepped in. "This home is not just an investment," I said quietly. Emily smiled, that patronizing smile of hers. "Of course, Mrs. Walker. We were just talking." But I saw the look they shared. An eye roll, a silent agreement that I was in the way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, touching the furniture, the photographs, the staircase railing my husband had carved himself. Every corner whispered memories, and every whisper hurt. A week later, David made his announcement at dinner. "I've been thinking," he said, barely glancing up from his plate. "It's time we sell this place. You can move into a smaller apartment, maybe near Aunt May." The fork slipped from my hand and clattered on the plate. "Sell this place?" I repeated. "Yes," he said flatly. "It's too big for you alone. You're wasting money on upkeep. It's not practical." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "Your father built this home, David, with his own hands. You grew up here. Yeah, and now I'm grown. Times change, Mom. You need to change too. Something in me broke that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly like glass cracking under pressure. I nodded slowly, pretending to agree because I was too tired to argue. But that night I sat awake thinking. I realized this house no longer represented safety. It had become a cage, not because of its walls, but because of the memories and the disrespect echoing inside them. The next morning, I made a decision I'd never imagined making. I called an old friend, Mark, a real estate agent who used to help our neighbors. I told him I wanted to sell. He hesitated. "You're sure, Anne? That house, it's your heart." "I'm sure," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. "We listed it quietly." I told him not to put up signs. Not yet. For the next few days, I went through closets, drawers, and boxes. Not to pack, but to remember. Every old photograph I touched, every school report card, every Christmas ornament, it was like closing a chapter of my life. Then, one night, David came home late again. His girlfriend's laughter followed him up the stairs. He didn't notice the boxes in the hallway. I sat on the porch, swing under the soft moonlight sipping tea. For the first time in years, I felt oddly calm. Mark called me the next morning. "And we have an offer, a good one. Cash buyer, quick closing." I took a deep breath. Do it. When I hung up, I looked around the living room. Sunlight pouring in through the lace curtains, dancing across the old wooden floor. I whispered to myself, "It's time." That evening, when David came down for dinner, I told him gently, "I'm selling the house." He froze mid-step. "You're what?" "I'm selling it," I repeated. "I signed the papers today." His face went pale. "Are you out of your mind? You can't just... This is our family home." "Our?" I asked quietly. "You said it was too big for me. You wanted me to move out." "That was different," he snapped. "You can't sell without talking to me." I looked him straight in the eyes. "David, your name isn't on the deed." He stared at me, mouth opening and closing, searching for words. "You said I was useless," I reminded him softly. "So I suppose I can't do much harm being useless, can I?" His face turned red. "This is insane," he yelled, storming upstairs and slamming his door. But for the first time, his anger didn't scare me. It didn't even hurt. It just confirmed what I already knew. I had finally taken my life back. The following morning, the air in the house was thick with silence. I could hear David pacing upstairs, heavy, restless steps creaking against the wooden floorboards. He didn't come down for breakfast, and I didn't call him. For years, I'd been the one to knock, to ask, to mend, to apologize. Not this time. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea staring out the window as the movers confirmed the schedule. The house would officially change hands in 3 days. Just 3 more sunrises, and this chapter of my life would be gone. I should have felt sadder than I did, but all I felt was an unfamiliar peace, like I'd finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. By noon, David came down, his expression tight with fury. "You really did it," he said. "You sold it." "Yes," I replied calmly. "Everything's finalized." He slammed his hand on the counter. "You're unbelievable, Mom. Where are we even supposed to go?" "We." The word almost made me laugh. "I don't know where you're going, David," I said evenly. "But I have plans." "Plans?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You can't just throw away everything Dad built." I stood, looking straight at him. "Your father built this home for family, but you stopped treating me like family the moment you called me useless." His jaw clenched. "I didn't mean that." "Yes, you did," I said. "And maybe that's okay, because it finally made me see things clearly." He groaned, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't fair." "No," I said softly. "It's not. But fairness stopped being part of our lives when respect left this house." He glared at me, but I could see confusion in his eyes. Confusion that came from realizing he no longer had control over the person he once dismissed. That evening I cooked dinner like I always did. Chicken soup, his favorite from when he was a boy. I didn't do it out of guilt. I did it because it reminded me of who I really was. Someone who gave, loved, and endured. He didn't eat. He just sat there scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice me. I wanted to tell him that selling the house wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. But I stayed quiet. some lessons can't be taught through words. Later that night, I packed the rest of my things. Photo albums, my mother's china, set a few books, and the old clock from the living room that had chimed every hour since my wedding day. Everything else could stay. The memories were already etched in me. As I moved through the rooms, I found an old box labeled David, school stuff. Inside were crayon drawings, medals, and a letter he once wrote in 3rd grade. "Mom, you're the best mom ever. When I grow up, I'll buy you a big house with a garden." I sat on the floor and cried quietly. Not because of what he'd become, but because of what we'd lost along the way. The next morning, I went out to the garden one last time. The autumn leaves had started to fall, carpeting the ground in shades of orange and gold. I ran my hand over the wooden fence my husband had built, remembering the afternoons we'd spent planting roses together. I whispered a goodbye to him, hoping somewhere he'd understand why I had to do this. When I walked back inside, I found David sitting in the living room, his eyes red, though he'd never admit he'd been crying. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded. He looked at the floor. "I know I've been awful. I thought you were trying to control everything. I didn't realize how much you were still doing for me." His words were sincere, but I could tell they came too late to change the course of things. "David," I said softly, sitting beside him, "love doesn't mean control. It means care. You stop seeing that." He swallowed hard. "Where will you go?" I smiled faintly. "Somewhere small, peaceful. There's a seaside town I visited once with your father. I think I'll start there." He nodded slowly. "And me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "That's up to you, son." We sat there in silence. Two people connected by blood but separated by pride. That night, he went to bed early. I stayed up watching the moonlight dance across the living room floor. The papers were on the table, the keys ready for the new owners. Everything was set. Around midnight, I went upstairs and peeked into his room. He was asleep, the same peaceful expression he had as a child before life hardened him. For a brief moment, I almost reconsidered everything. But then I remembered his words. "You're useless now." I whispered to myself. Maybe I was useless to him, but not to myself. Before dawn, I took one last walk through the house. I touched the walls, the doors, the memories, not with sorrow, but gratitude. Every pain, every joy, every heartbreak, it had all brought me to this clarity. I left a note on David's nightstand. Just one sentence. "Sometimes losing a home is the only way to find your peace." Then I took my suitcase, locked the door quietly, and stepped into the morning light. The car was waiting at the curb. I glanced back once, at the house that had witnessed my entire life. I didn't see a building anymore. I saw freedom. As I drove away, the sunrise painted the sky in gold. My heart ached, but it also felt lighter than it had in years. Somewhere behind me, a man would wake up and realize that the woman he dismissed had finally chosen herself. The small coastal town where I settled was nothing like the city. Here, time moved slower. The mornings smelled of salt and rain, and the evenings were filled with the hum of distant waves. I rented a small cottage with peeling white paint and a porch swing that creaked when the wind brushed past it. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long while that felt enough. In the first few days, I didn't talk much. I spent my mornings walking along the beach, collecting seashells, and watching the tide crawl up the shore. At night, I'd light a candle, make myself tea, and write letters I never sent. To my late husband, to the younger version of myself, and, yes, sometimes to David. "Dear David," I wrote one evening, "you'll understand one day that strength doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it's walking away before you're broken beyond repair." There were moments I missed him deeply. His laughter, his old habits, even his arguments. Motherhood doesn't just switch off because your child grows cold. It lingers like an ache in the chest, an empty chair at every meal. But with each passing day, I learned to sit with that emptiness instead of running from it. A few weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting was messy, but familiar. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short letter from David. "Mom, I woke up that morning and the house was empty. I thought I'd feel angry, but all I felt was lost. I don't know how to live without your presence filling the rooms. I've been staying with Emily, but it doesn't feel like home. I guess I never realized what home really meant until it was gone. I'm sorry, David." I read it 3 times before setting it down. The words didn't erase the years of hurt, but they were a start. A small crack of light in a long tunnel of silence. For the next few days, I kept replaying memories in my head. The little boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who once cried because he'd broken my favorite mug, who promised he'd always take care of me. Somewhere along the way, life had hardened him, and I'd stopped reminding him that tenderness wasn't weakness. I decided to write back. "Dear David," I began, "homes can be rebuilt. Relationships too, if both people want to. But I need time to heal, to find who I am outside of being your mother. I hope you understand." I sealed the letter, walked to the nearby post office, and mailed it. Whether he replied or not, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Weeks passed. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to children. Their laughter filled the small hall like sunlight, and every time a child handed me a crayon drawing, I saw echoes of the little boy David once was. One day, as I was cleaning brushes, a girl named Lily asked, "Do you have kids, Miss Anne?" I paused, smiling faintly. "Yes," I said. "A son." "Does he live here?" she asked innocently. "No, sweetheart," I replied softly. "But he lives in my heart." That night, I walked along the beach again, the moonlight silvering the waves. I thought about forgiveness, not as something you give to others, but as something you gift yourself, so you can finally move on. Then one cold afternoon months later, I heard a knock on my cottage door. When I opened it, David stood there. His hair was longer, his face thinner, and his eyes, those same blue eyes that once held defiance, now carried humility. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice trembled. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stared at him, half in disbelief, half afraid that if I blinked he'd vanish. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded silently, stepping aside. He looked around, his gaze landing on the simple wooden table, the photographs of the seaside, the half-finished cup of tea on the counter. "It's small," he said softly, "but it's nice." "It's peaceful," I replied. He nodded, then exhaled shakily. "I've been a terrible son." "David." "No, let me say it," he interrupted. "I treated you like you were a burden when you were the only person who ever stood by me. I thought independence meant pushing you away. But when I lost you, when I woke up to that empty house, it felt like losing Dad all over again. I felt tears prick my eyes. We all make mistakes," I whispered. He sat down at the table, burying his face in his hands. "I sold the car, Mom. The one Dad left me. I thought I could replace what I lost with money, but I couldn't." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "Money builds walls, David, but love builds homes." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly, "but I'm giving it anyway." We sat there in silence, the sound of the sea outside filling the spaces where words failed. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised. Not the angry man who'd pushed me away, but the child who used to chase fireflies in the yard. After a long pause, he whispered, "Can I stay for a few days?" I smiled. "You can stay as long as you need, son." That night, I made soup again, the same recipe I used to make when he was little. As we ate, I realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it allows you to stop living inside it. Later, when he went to bed, I stood by the window and watched the tide roll in. The waves came and went, leaving the shore changed yet whole again. For the first time in a long while, so was I. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, brushing warmth across my face. For a moment, I forgot there was another heartbeat in the house, one I hadn't heard in months. Then I caught the faint creak of the guest room door opening, and I smiled. David walked out slowly, still groggy, his hair messy like when he was a teenager, stumbling out of bed before school. For a fleeting second, it was like the years hadn't happened, like he was still my little boy rubbing his eyes and asking what was for breakfast. "Morning?" he said, his voice rough, but softer than before. "Morning," I replied, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "Still take sugar?" He nodded, sitting at the small wooden table, watching the steam rise. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was comfortable, fragile, but peaceful. "I was thinking," he began hesitantly, "I could help you fix the porch. The swing's a bit squeaky." I chuckled. "It has character." "Yeah. Well, maybe it deserves a little oil." He smiled faintly and I couldn't help but laugh. That sound, his real laugh, was something I hadn't heard in so long that it almost startled me. We spent that morning together. He helped me in the garden trimming the overgrown rose bushes and repairing a loose fence board. Every now and then we'd glance at each other, unsure whether to speak of the past or just enjoy the moment. At one point he stopped working and said quietly, "I never realized how hard it must have been for you. Losing Dad. Taking care of everything alone. I guess I didn't want to see it. It made me feel weak." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see the cold, arrogant man who'd once sneered at me. I saw a man carrying regret like a heavy coat trying to shrug it off one apology at a time. "We all carry pain differently," I said gently. "You built walls. I built silence. Neither of us healed." He nodded. "Maybe now we can." We finished the repairs by noon. As we sat on the steps sipping lemonade, he turned to me with an almost shy expression. "Mom, I saw the listing for the house online," he said. "You sold it fast." "Yes," I replied calmly. "Quicker than I thought." "Did you ever think about keeping it?" I looked out toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a blur of silver light. "I did," I admitted. "But every wall in that house carried echoes of hurt. Sometimes to build peace, you have to let go of what held the pain." He was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I wish I'd been there to help you pack." I smiled softly. "You were busy being independent, remember?" He laughed, a sad, knowing laugh. "Yeah. Turns out independence isn't much without the people who made you who you are." Later that afternoon, we went into town together. I introduced him to some of my friends from the walking club, and he helped Mrs. Carter carry boxes for the community bake sale. It was surreal watching him. This grown man who once dismissed me as useless, now humbly serving others. That evening, as we returned home, I found a letter tucked under my door. It was from the bank, confirmation that the sale of the old family house was complete and the funds were safely transferred to my new account. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into a drawer. After dinner, David and I sat outside on the porch, swinging the sea breeze, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The old house?" "I miss what it used to mean," I said softly. "Not what it became." He looked at me, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You know that night, when I said those words to you, 'You're useless now.' I didn't mean them. I was angry at myself, at life, but I took it out on you." "I know," I whispered. "But words leave shadows, David. They linger long after they're spoken." He swallowed hard. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to bring back the light." We sat there quietly, listening to the waves. The air was cool now, and for the first time in years, I felt something pure. Not pride, not revenge, but peace. When he went to bed that night, I stayed on the porch a little longer, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the sale, the silence, the apology. It had all led here, to this moment of calm where the pieces finally started fitting together again. Before going inside, I whispered a small prayer into the night. "Thank you," I said to the wind, to the sea, to life itself, for teaching me that letting go isn't losing, it's choosing peace. The next morning, David packed his things. He stood at the door, holding his bag, looking unsure. "I'll come back," he said. "I don't want to lose you again." "You won't," I told him. "But this time, you'll come back because you want to, not because you need something." He hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, Son." As he drove away, I watched his car disappear down the winding road. I felt no emptiness this time, only gratitude. Because in losing everything, I'd found myself again. That evening, I took my journal and wrote one last entry. Freedom doesn't come from running away. It comes from standing up and choosing your worth. My son once called me useless, but today I know better. I am strong, I am whole, and I am finally free. I closed the journal, placed it on the nightstand, and looked out the window at the sea. The waves kept rolling in and out, relentless, timeless, beautiful. And so did life.